"Is this some kind of joke?" Judge Arthur Redfield sneered, his voice a rasp of disbelief and fury that echoed off the polished wood of the courtroom. The woman standing before him, the one his bailiff had just manhandled, met his gaze without a flicker of fear. They thought it was over, but they had no idea this woman was about to rewrite the law in their own temple of justice. The air in courtroom 4B was thick and stale, a miserable cocktail of cheap disinfectant, old paper, and the faint, metallic scent of human anxiety. Sunlight struggled through tall, grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in lazy columns. It was a room designed not for justice, but for intimidation, a place where hope came to be methodically dismantled by procedure. In the third row of the public gallery, Imani Wallace sat perfectly still. She was an island of calm in a sea of nervous energy. Her grey pantsuit was simple, functional, and utterly forgettable, the kind of garment that blended into the background of institutional life. It was a deliberate choice. She had bought it yesterday from a discount store, the fabric slightly scratchy against her skin. It was a uniform of anonymity, a cloak of invisibility. To any casual observer, she was just another worried relative, another face in the crowd of the disenfranchised who passed through these halls daily. Her posture was erect, but not rigid, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. She noted the hairline cracks in the plaster ceiling, the way the court reporter's fingers flew across the stenotype machine with practiced indifference, the weary slump of the public defender's shoulders. She was cataloguing the environment, absorbing its oppressive weight. Then the door to the side of the bench swung open with a theatrical flourish, and Judge Arthur Redfield swept in. He was a man who didn't just wear his robes. He inhabited them. They billowed around him like a dark cloud, a physical manifestation of his self-importance. His face was a florid map of indulgence and impatience, his jowls quivering with every self-satisfied pronouncement. He settled into his high-backed leather chair with a proprietary grunt, the worn leather sighing under his bulk. He scanned the courtroom with a look of profound boredom, his gaze a sweeping dismissal of every person present. His eyes were small and hard, like chips of granite. He was a king. This was the man she had come to see. This was the rot she had been sent to excise. "Next case," he boomed, his voice unnaturally loud in the hushed room. "The State versus Marcus Cole." A knot of ice formed in Imani's stomach, but her expression remained serene. Her nephew Marcus was led from the holding area by a bailiff. He was a good kid, a 19-year-old art student, with a spirit as bright as the canvases he painted. He looked small and terrified in the ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. The charge was absurd, loitering with intent to commit a crime. He had been sketching the courthouse architecture for a class project when two officers decided he looked suspicious. He had been sitting on a public bench, in broad daylight. His crime was being a young black man in a world that saw his very existence as a provocation. From his throne, Redfield squinted down at Marcus. A slow, ugly smile spread across his lips. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted weak prey. He didn't see a student, a nephew, a human being. He saw a statistic, a stereotype, a nail to be hammered down. Another one, Redfield thought, a familiar wave of contempt washing over him. He could tell their kind a mile away. The defiant posture, the sullen look in their eyes. They all had it. This one wore his hair in those ridiculous twists, a clear sign of a troublemaker. The kid was probably casing the building, looking for a way in after hours. It was always the same story. He relished these moments. This was where he made a difference, cleaning up the streets one punk at a time. It was his duty, his power. The public defender, a young, overworked man named Mr. Green, approached the lectern. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew. He looked like he had already lost, and the day had barely begun. "Your Honor," Green began, his voice thin, "my client is a full-time student at the City Art Institute. He has no prior record. He was simply completing a homework assignment. We have a letter from his professor confirming the assignment." Redfield waved a dismissive hand, not even bothering to look at the paper Green held out. "An assignment to do what?" "Case the joint." "I've heard it all, Counselor." He leaned forward, fixing his glare on Marcus. "What's your name, boy?" The word hung in the air, heavy and poisoned. Boy. It was a deliberate shard of glass, meant to cut and diminish. Marnie's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus Cole, sir," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly but respectful. "Sir!" Redfield chuckled. A wet, unpleasant sound. "It's Your Honor!" "I'll make sure of it." He turned his attention to the prosecutor, a smug woman in a sharp suit who looked on with bored approval. "What's the state's recommendation on bail?" Given the defendant's lack of ties to the community and the serious nature of the potential crime, the state recommends bail be set at $50,000, she recited, her tone flat and rehearsed. $50,000 for sketching on a bench. It was a death sentence for a kid who worked a part-time job at a coffee shop to buy his art supplies. It was designed to break him, to ensure he rotted in a cell until he was desperate enough to take whatever plea deal they offered. 50,000, the public defender sputtered. "Your Honor, that is unconscionable. He has a family, a job. He's a student. His family is sitting right there," Redfield sneered, gesturing vaguely toward the gallery. He didn't look at Imani, didn't even register her as an individual. She was just part of the scenery of despair. If they care so much, they can scrape it together. He banged his gavel. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Bail is set at $50,000. Cash, bond only," he smirked. "Take him away." Marcus's face crumpled in disbelief and terror. The bailiff grabbed his arm and started to lead him back to the holding cell. His eyes found Imani's in the gallery, wide with a silent plea. She gave him the slightest of nods, a message that passed between them in an instant. "Stay strong. I am here. This is not over." Imani watched the scene unfold with a chilling detachment. The anger was there, a white-hot coal burning deep inside her, but it was a controlled burn. It was fuel. On the surface, she was a statue of composure. Her heart rate, she noted, was as steady as a metronome. She observed Redfield's every move, the way he preened after delivering his cruel verdict, the casual contempt with which he treated the public defender, the complicit smirk, shared with the prosecutor. She saw the ecosystem of corruption laid bare before her. It was a well-oiled machine, and Arthur Redfield was its proud operator. He moved on to the next case, a petty theft with the same blustering arrogance. He berated a young mother for being late, mocking her excuse about a sick child. He threatened an elderly man with jail time for an unpaid parking ticket. He was a tyrant on a throne of cheap wood, wielding his sliver of power like a broadsword. Across the room, the court clerk, a man named David Henderson, shuffled a stack of files. He was a veteran of this courthouse, a man with graying temples and eyes that had seen far too much. He had been here for 30 years, and he knew Judge Redfield was a disgrace, but he also knew the system protected its own. He had seen the internal memo that morning. He had seen the photograph that accompanied it. When Imani Wallace had walked in and sat down in the gallery, his blood had run cold. He recognized her instantly, despite the plain clothes. Chief Justice Imani Wallace, sworn in at a private ceremony with the governor at 9 a.m. Her first official act, according to the memo, was to begin an unannounced tour of the state's courts to observe proceedings firsthand. Henderson felt a tremor of fear, but also a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. He watched as Redfield savaged her nephew, completely oblivious to the cannon he was aiming at his own feet. Henderson wanted to scream, to warn the pompous old fool, but he also wanted to see it happen. He risked a glance at her. He tried to send a message with his eyes, a subtle shake of his head that said, "Be careful." Imani's eyes met his for a fraction of a second. She registered his presence, his recognition, his warning. She gave him a look in return, not of gratitude or acknowledgement, but of pure, unadulterated resolve. It was a look that said, "I know, let him." Henderson understood. She wasn't here just to observe. She was here to hunt. He turned back to his paperwork, his hands trembling slightly. He was about to have a front-row seat to the most spectacular act of judicial self-immolation in state history. The morning dragged on. A parade of human misery processed through Redfield's machine. With each case, he was performing, puffing out his chest, his voice growing louder, more bombastic. He was the law. He was the righteous authority in this room, the thin line between order and the chaos he saw in the faces before him. Finally, the public defender for the next case, a young woman with a determined set to her jaw, tried to introduce a piece of exculpatory evidence. It was a security camera timestamp that proved her client, accused of shoplifting, was miles away from the scene of the crime. Redfield waved it away without a glance. "I'm not interested in your doctored video, counselor." Motion to introduce is denied. "But, Your Honor," the defender protested, "this is a clear violation of discovery rules and my client's constitutional rights." "Are you questioning my ruling?" Redfield roared, his face turning a shade of purple. "Fined $1,000. The young lawyer recoiled as if struck. The entire courtroom held its breath. This was Redfield's favorite move, crushing dissent with overwhelming, unaccountable power. He scanned the room, daring anyone else to challenge him. His eyes fell on the gallery, on the silent woman in the gray suit. She was still watching him, her expression unreadable. For the first time, her stillness got under his skin. Everyone else in the room cowered or looked away. But she just watched. It was an affront. Her calm defiance was an intolerable sign of disrespect. It was then that Imani Wallace decided the time for observation was over. She had seen enough. She had gathered the evidence she needed, not in a file, but in her memory. Every violation, every sneer, every abuse of power, catalogued with perfect clarity. She stood up. Her movement was slow, deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. Redfield stared at her, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Does the gallery have something to say?" he asked, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. Imani's voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent courtroom. It was a voice accustomed to command, stripped of all emotion save for a cold, hard precision. "Yes, Your Honor, it does." She took a step into the aisle. "In the case of the State versus Marcus Cole, you violated Judicial Canon 3B5 by demonstrating manifest bias based on race and socioeconomic status. You violated Penal Code 1385 by refusing to consider a dismissal in the furtherance of justice. And you set a bail amount that is punitive and excessive in direct violation." The public defender stared, his mouth agape. The prosecutor's smug look vanished, replaced by confusion. Redfield's face contorted with rage. He was apoplectic. This was not happening. Some woman, some nobody, off the street, was standing in his courtroom, quoting law at him. It was the ultimate insult. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" he bellowed, rising from his chair, his fists clenched on the bench. He felt the foundations of his world shaking. He had to crush this, and crush it now. "I am a concerned citizen," Imani said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "You are in contempt of court," he shrieked, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling sausage-like finger at her. "You are a disruptive, ignorant menace. Bailiff Riggs, get this woman out of my courtroom." Now, the bailiff, a burly man named Riggs, whose neck was as thick as a tree trunk, had been watching with a mixture of confusion and anger. The judge's order was his command. He stomped down the aisle, his face set in a grim mask of duty. He was going to enjoy this. "Let's go, lady?" Riggs grunted, his hand clamping down on Imani's upper arm like a vice. His fingers dug into her flesh. This was the moment. The bait so patiently laid had been taken with spectacular, predictable greed. Redfield watched as Riggs began to haul the woman toward the doors. A triumphant sneer returned to his face. He had won. He leaned into his microphone, his voice booming with restored authority. "You're out of your league. This is my courtroom, and in my courtroom I am the law." Imani did not struggle. She allowed Riggs to pull her 5, 6, 7 steps toward the exit. The heavy wooden doors loomed before them. The public humiliation was complete. In Redfield's mind, the incident was over. He was wrong. Just as they reached the threshold, with Riggs's hand still crushing her arm, Imani stopped. She planted her feet for a man of his size. Riggs was shocked by the sudden, immovable resistance. It was like trying to pull a statue from its pedestal. She turned her head slightly, her profile visible to the entire room. And then she spoke. Her voice was different now. The quiet precision was still there, but it was layered with something else, something terrifyingly cold and absolute. It was the sound of a guillotine blade being released. "Officer Riggs," she said, her voice resonating in the stunned silence. "Let go of my arm." Riggs hesitated, confused by her tone. The judge gave an unlawful order," Imani interrupted, her voice dropping even lower, becoming a lethal whisper that was somehow louder than Redfield's shouting. "And you are now committing felony assault on a judicial officer. I am ordering you to release me and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest." A ripple of incredulous laughter came from the bench. "Judicial officer?" Redfield choked out tears of mirth and fury in his eyes. "You're delusional. She's lost her mind." "Get her out." Riggs, spurred on by the judge, tightened his grip and gave another heave. Slam. The movement was a blur of grey fabric and controlled force. It was not a brawl, it was a disassembly. Imani shifted her weight, dropped her center of gravity, and used Riggs's own momentum against him. A sharp, precise strike to the pressure point on his wrist made his fingers go numb, his grip vanishing instantly. A perfectly executed hip throw sent the 250-pound bailiff flying over her hip. He landed on the marble floor with a sickening thud that echoed through the courtroom, the air knocked from his lungs in a pained whoosh. He lay there gasping like a landed fish, staring up at the ceiling in total shock. Imani stood over him, not even breathing heavily. She adjusted the sleeve of her simple grey blazer. The entire courtroom was frozen in a state of collective paralysis. The only sound was Riggs's ragged breathing. Imani turned, her body now fully facing the bench. She looked directly at Judge Arthur Redfield, and for the first time, he saw her. He truly saw her. The anonymity was gone, burned away by an intensity that made the blood drain from his face. The woman standing there was not a worried relative. She was a predator. "Am I delusional, Judge Redfield?" she asked, her voice soft and carrying an edge of polished steel. At that exact moment, as if on cue, the main courtroom doors swung open. Two state marshals, tall and imposing in their crisp dark blue uniforms, entered with silent, purposeful strides. He was holding a single manila file like a sacred text. Redfield's mind struggled to process what was happening. His world was tilting on its axis, the familiar floor falling away into a terrifying abyss. The marshals ignored the groaning bailiff on the floor. Their eyes were fixed on the bench. On him. Henderson stopped at the prosecution's table. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling, but gaining strength with every word. "Your Honor," he began, his voice ringing with a formality that was both a courtesy and an indictment. He was addressing Redfield, but his words were for the entire room, for the historical record that was being written in that very instant. "Allow me to introduce the Honorable Imani Wallace," Henderson announced. He opened the file and held up a laminated document. It was an official judicial appointment, sealed with the state crest. Next to the dense legal text was a photograph of the woman in the gray suit. "Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court," Henderson finished, his voice now booming with the gravity of the declaration. "Sworn into office this morning at 900 hours by the governor of this state." Silence. A profound, deafening, soul-crushing silence. Then, a wave of gasps, whispers, and shocked murmurs swept through the room like a fire. Lawyers turned to each other in disbelief. The court reporter's hands were frozen over her machine. The smug prosecutor looked like she had seen a ghost. Redfield's florid face had gone from crimson to a ghastly, pasty white. A sheen of cold sweat erupted on his brow and upper lip. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His brain was a mess of short-circuiting synapses. Chief Justice, the woman he had just ordered to be thrown out, the woman whose nephew he had mocked and railroaded, was his boss, the highest judicial authority in the entire state. From the side door leading to the judge's chambers, another figure emerged. It was presiding Judge Miller, a man of impeccable reputation and seniority. Henderson had slipped out to alert him moments before. Miller's face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. He walked directly to the bench, his eyes boring into Redfield. "Arthur!" Miller said, his voice low and seething with rage. "What in God's name have you done?" Redfield could only stare, his mind a howling void. It was a joke. It had to be. A prank. A nightmare. But the state marshals were real. They were walking toward him now, their steps heavy and final on the courtroom floor. They moved with an unnerving calm, bypassing the still-dazed Bailiff Riggs. One of them, a man with a face carved from stone, placed a firm hand on Redfield's shoulder. The touch was not violent, but it was absolute. "Judge Arthur Redfield," the marshal said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You are being relieved of your duties and detained pending a full investigation by the Judicial Conduct Commission. Please come with us." Redfield flinched as if he had been burned. "You can't do this," he whispered, the words ragged and pathetic. "This is my courtroom." Imani Wallace took a single step forward. The entire room hung on her next words. She looked at the broken man, the collapsed tyrant, stripped of his power and his dignity in the space of 3 minutes. His robes, once a symbol of his authority, now looked like a cheap costume on a pathetic old man. Her voice, when she spoke, was not triumphant. It was not angry. It was the quiet, devastating sound of a final judgment being rendered. "You said this was your courtroom," she said, her voice a whisper that cut through the stunned air. "You were wrong." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on him, crushing him. "The people are taking it back." The marshals gently but firmly pulled the unresisting Redfield from his chair. As they led him away, his robes trailing behind him like a funeral shroud, His eyes met Imani's one last time. In them, she saw not remorse, but the pure, uncomprehending terror of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had just discovered his wings were made of wax. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Arthur Redfield's public immolation became the biggest scandal in the state's legal history. He was immediately suspended without pay, his cases reassigned. The investigation launched by Chief Justice Wallace's office was swift and merciless. It was like turning over a rock and finding a nest of corruption teeming beneath. The inquiry into the Marcus Cole case uncovered years of racially biased rulings. Financial audits revealed a complex kickback scheme with a local bail bond company, explaining the impossibly high bails Redfield consistently set for minority defendants. He had been getting rich off the misery he created. The media frenzy was biblical. King Redfield dethroned in his own court. Undercover Chief Justice exposes rot in judiciary. His face, contorted in a mask of sweaty panic as the marshals led him away, was on the front page of every newspaper and the top of every news site for a week straight. He became a national symbol of judicial arrogance and corruption. He was disbarred within a month. His name struck from the rolls with prejudice. The Judicial Conduct Commission recommended his immediate removal, and the legislature obliged. His pension, built over 30 years of service, was stripped. Federal charges for fraud and conspiracy. His personal life disintegrated. His wife, a prominent socialite, filed for divorce the day the federal indictment came down, citing irreconcilable humiliation. His friends, the powerful men with whom he played golf and drank expensive scotch, stopped returning his calls. He was a pariah. He had to sell his sprawling mansion in the gated community to cover his mounting legal fees. In the ultimate crushing irony, he was declared indigent. The court was forced to appoint a public defender to represent him, someone just as overworked and under-resourced as the young man he had so casually dismissed on that final fateful day. Bailiff Riggs was fired and faced charges for assault, which were later pleaded down to a misdemeanor in exchange for his full testimony against Redfield. The smug prosecutor was placed on administrative leave and eventually resigned in disgrace. But Imani's work went far beyond a single corrupt judge. The Redfield scandal, as it came to be known, was the crowbar she used to pry open the entire system. She convened a blue ribbon panel to overhaul the state's bail system, replacing cash bail for non-violent offenses with a system based on risk assessment. She implemented mandatory, ongoing anti-bias training for all judges and court personnel. A new, transparent, and robust system for reporting and investigating judicial misconduct was established, with real teeth and independent oversight. The cleansing of the system was painful and public, leading to the forced retirement or removal of 2 other judges found to have engaged in similar patterns of behavior. The rot was deep, but she was determined to carve it out. Weeks later, Imani Wallace stood in her new office. It was a world away from the oppressive gloom of courtroom 4B. The spacious room was lined with books, and one entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The scent was of lemon polish and fresh coffee, not stale fear. Her nephew Marcus stood beside her, looking out at the view. The bogus charges against him had been expunged on her first day in office. He had been a bit shell-shocked by the whole affair, but the terror had been replaced by a new sense of purpose. With a glowing recommendation from the Chief Justice herself, he had been granted a full scholarship to the State University's prestigious pre-law program. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, a small smile touching her lips as she saw the caller ID. "David," she said warmly. David Henderson, the brave clerk who had stood with her, was now her chief of staff. "The final report on the bail reform initiative is ready for your review, Chief Justice," His voice came through the line, crisp and professional. "Thank you, David," she replied. "You did the right thing." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the city below, over the countless lives that intersected with the system she now helmed. "A robe," she said softly, more to herself than to him, "is meant to be a symbol of service, a reminder of the weight of the duty we owe the people. It is not a crown." She let out a soft sigh. "Some people forget that. They won't forget again," Henderson said. "Not while you're here. See that they don't," she said, a hint of steel returning to her voice. She ended the call and placed the phone back on her large mahogany desk. She turned to Marcus, who was looking at her with an expression of pure awe. He still couldn't quite reconcile the quiet, art-loving aunt who used to take him to museums with the formidable force of nature, who had dismantled a corrupt judge with a few quiet words. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Her expression softened, the Chief Justice receding, to be replaced by the aunt he knew. The law should be a shield for the innocent, Marcus, not a sword for the powerful. Never forget that. He nodded, his eyes shining with understanding and a newfound determination. "I won't, Aunt Imani. I promise." Imani smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. The fight was far from over. The system was vast, and the work was endless. But a battle had been won, a message had been sent, and for the first time in a long time, the scales of justice in this state felt a little more balanced. She gestured toward the stack of files on her desk. "Ready to get to work." What an incredible story of karmic justice. Chief Justice Imani Wallace proved that true authority comes not from a robe or a gavel, but from courage. Judge Redfield thought he was untouchable, a king in his own courtroom, but karma came for him, dressed in a simple gray pantsuit. He learned the hard way that the law is bigger than any one person. If you loved watching this arrogant bully get exactly what he deserved, please smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more stories just like this one. Share this video with anyone who loves a satisfying story of karma and seeing justice served cold. We all know someone who needs to see an abuser of power get their public comeuppance. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our daily drama and revenge stories. We post new videos every single day, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you were in Chief Justice Wallace's shoes? Would you have revealed yourself sooner, or let him dig his own grave, just like she did? See you in the next video.